Good evening, good afternoon, good morning, or whenever you happen to be listening to this. Welcome to the Film Realist Podcast, the film and TV podcast from a complete nobody that is hopefully for somebody. I'm your host, Kyle Naranya. On this week's episode of the podcast, this is holiday movie catch-up. So there will be two reviews on this week's episode, or if you did read the episode title, you know what I'm reviewing, where there will be a review of Ferrari, the latest Michael Mann film starring Adam Driver and Penelope Cruz. And the second review is the musical adaptation of the much acclaimed film from 1985, I believe, The Color Purple. There is going to be two non-spoiler sections and two spoiler sections, so if you have not had a chance to see either of these films yet, no worries, there will be sections for you if you do not want to be spoiled. Time codes for all of the sections will be listed in the description. Let's get into the first review of today's episode, Ferrari.
Two objects cannot occupy the same point in space at the same moment in time.
Now, I know in recent years there has been a substantial amount of more fandom, particularly in North America, towards Formula One. Obviously, Ferrari has a long history with racing in general. I, however, am not one of those people. I didn't watch the Netflix documentary. I do have close family who have certainly become more invested in Formula One. When it comes to cars in general, I am not the biggest of fans, but I am a big fan of Adam Driver, who is one of the top tier actors working particularly now. I thought it was quite interesting that there were certainly a lot of memes about Adam Driver having another film where he uses an Italian accent, but a drama around Ferrari having Adam Driver play Enzo Ferrari and it being about the early days really intrigued me, and Michael Mann is a filmmaker I quite respect, so I was very interested to see the film. I have to say, I think it's a very gripping drama with substantial performances that I think will likely be talked about, particularly leading into awards season. Of course, Adam Driver as the titular Ferrari is very, very good. However, I was most pleasantly surprised by the two leading women in the film. Penelope Cruz and Shailene Woodley give phenomenal performances. What was most interesting to me, and it's hard to view these things with a 2024 lens, but particularly the relationship that Enzo had with Lara around the controlling stake in Ferrari, and this being a biopic, I guess if you don't know anything, everything to me was a revelation and a spoiler, but without talking about specifics in the actual plot points of the film, it was really compelling to see how these relationships evolved and particularly what each individual's goals were with the teetering success of Ferrari at the time, this being just not slightly, I guess 10 years after World War II, and was kind of the tipping point for Ferrari's financial viability at the time, which was really cool. It's something that I don't really think about at all, are the financial stakes of these car companies that just seem iconic and have been there since the dawn of time. I mean, it's all relative. I was not born in the 50s. Can't you tell? I was thoroughly enthralled with this film. It being such a heavy drama that can at times present as not necessarily exciting, I was thoroughly gripped throughout the film. Michael Mann is somebody who knows really how to film conversations and how to really use characters to evaluate what is happening around them. And the personal goals of each of the characters and how that's reflected in what's going on and the choices they make and each individual's purpose towards the story was really captivating. Particularly Penelope Cruz, who is, again, a woman in the 50s who at the time, I'm sure this was abnormal for her to have such a substantial stake in Ferrari. 50%, I guess, is the way that it works out. Again, a lot of this is fact, so it's not necessarily spoiler, but there are events that I'm not going to talk about because I was thoroughly surprised by those. But it was a performance by Penelope Cruz that absolutely floored me. I really hope it doesn't go overlooked. Adam Driver as the lead, I think is going to get a lot of attention, and I know the film in general has had some positive reception, but if you are a fan of cars in general, and particularly an iconic brand like Ferrari, I really think this is a film you're thoroughly going to enjoy. I wouldn't put it in my top 10 retrospectively. I know I've already released that list. You can listen to that on last week's episode, but overall, I was really enjoying the film. At times, it can be really difficult to do historical biopics like this and not have it feel particularly one note or it follow the same structure as a typical biopic. You can look at a lot of more recent musicians or singers biopics for that formula that they follow, but having Enzo Ferrari almost portrayed antagonistically with the relationship he has, particularly with Laura, was really interesting. Of course, his perspective on what he's doing is always for the betterment of Ferrari and his family, but the fact that this guy certainly had made some choices that don't necessarily reflect positively on him, I'm glad that we get a fully three-dimensional perspective on this person as opposed to it just being, well, he made Ferrari, he's an absolute icon. Allowing there to be drama and show the less clean aspects of the person's personal choices and the relationships around them makes for a really interesting story that I would recommend to anybody who's a fan of car culture in general. Adam Driver should be somebody that you should want to see in general. He's somebody General Motors. I don't know. That just sort of came to me. I apologize for that. And so, of course, you're going to see a lot of racing. And if you enjoy the more technical know-how on cars, there is some of that in this film as well, which completely went over my head. I'm not somebody who knows I'd say nothing, next to nothing when it comes to vehicles. I can change my tires, my windshield washer fluid. That's probably it. I can put air in a tire, I guess, so that's something. So this film to me was super captivating in the fact that I'm not somebody who is completely immersed in Formula One or heavy into car culture in general. Found it very enthralling, and I enjoyed it from start to finish. I would say that I don't think the conclusion is necessarily the cleanest. I thought there might be more resolution to the ending. It's sort of a soft ending where you get an epilogue of text to kind of explain what happened moving forward. I do really like the fact that the film is just over 2 hours, so it's not a long slog like here's the overall start of Ferrari. It picks a particular window that I think Michael Mann and the screenwriter Troy Kennedy Martin thought was the most interesting aspect to talk about. This, of course, was based on the book Enzo Ferrari, The Man, the Cars, the Races, and the Machine. And having all of those elements in the film and it being about a particular race in general and being thrust into the purpose of this race and the result of it fundamentally could have affected where Ferrari was and where could have thoroughly changed where they are now in car culture and I guess their state amongst the tier of car manufacturers. I know this is probably sounding like complete jargon, but it's not a world I'm familiar with, so I'm doing my best. As an overall film, I thoroughly enjoyed the experience. I would highly recommend you check it out if you want a captivating drama that is, in fact, a biography of some sort of a, as I said, specific period in the Ferrari family and car manufacturing history. This is one for you.
All of us are racers. It's our deadly passion. Our terrible joy.
Spoilers for Ferrari, and I guess anything around this particular period of time that the film does cover. So the film does open up with almost an origin element where we see Enzo Ferrari racing. And I have to say, I really appreciate the attempt to integrate 2023 footage into something from likely the 30s, if not 40s. They certainly tried their best. I think it would have worked better if the film tried to just use the actual footage. This is something that I haven't seen a lot of people talk about. Obviously, as I stated in the non-spoiler section, I think that Adam Driver is a phenomenal actor. I don't necessarily know if he fits the same size as Enzo Ferrari. I'd be very curious. I should probably just let's look this up. How tall he was. I don't think he was as tall. Oh, he was 6'2". Interesting. So, yeah, probably pretty close. Not something I was aware of, but I found that use of visuals and trying to look very dated on a big TV, not TV, I saw this at the movie theater, to be slightly comical because it does its best attempt to look that old, but even with the best Photoshop and filters, it just doesn't necessarily match up. There have been times in biopics before where actual footage has been used and it's edited in a way or cut in a way, so that way you're not necessarily aware that it's not footage that was filmed for the movie. And I don't know if that would have been better. I've never seen that footage to begin with. I don't know if that footage necessarily exists, but I think that's an element that could have been changed. Otherwise, outside of that, in terms of the actual car investigation, the culture, the races, particularly the specifics around the racing in general, I think all of those elements are presented quite well, as I said already. For somebody who has next to no knowledge in this subject, I found it to be not exposition heavy, but really interesting, particularly in the dialogue with Enzo's his son out of wedlock. His child that he had with Laura, unfortunately, had passed away. And so he has this son, Piero, with Shailene Woodley's character. And this is one avenue that I couldn't help look at with a 2024 lens, and the relationships in this time, he has all the power. Well, interestingly enough, he didn't in terms of the actual control for Ferrari, having to negotiate with Laura for her stake or percentage of ownership, so that way he could negotiate, because as it's presented in the film, we do know that Ferrari is going bankrupt because they don't make enough cars to make a profit to then fund the racing division. And I'm not necessarily sure if this is how it works nowadays. I'd be very curious to see what the numbers look like in terms of investment versus profit on the general car sales, luxury cars, and then, well, I wouldn't even say Ferraris are all luxury. What am I saying? But in terms of funding the actual Formula One races and the investment into the drivers, the culture for this, and the particular racers, I'm sure if you're a Formula One or just racing historian, these people would matter to you substantially, but they were complete unknowns to me. I found it really interesting to see Patrick Dempsey with a complete white dyed hair. He went full silver fox for this performance. Now, let's see. I don't really know if it matches because he's wearing a helmet in his Wikipedia, but overall, the push for this one particular race, that this was going to that this was going to define Ferrari's future, and that this would allow them the opportunity to then fund more car sales, to then fund more driving. That being the main thrust of the film was really interesting, and something I was not aware of whatsoever was the horrible crash that does occur while on the, I don't even want to say this wrong, but I'm going to, so apologies for the mispronunciation, but the Mille Miglia, I apologize, I probably said that wrong, but this one particular race, and the film is certainly not family friendly. It is much more mature, particularly in the relationships that Enzo has with the two women in his life. And the car crash that ensues in the film is very graphic. I did not expect to see the graphic nature of the results handled so maturely. So bear in mind if you have a weak stomach and do not want to see any human beings who have been delimbered or several significant not murders, kills. I don't know how to phrase it at all, but so there were, during this race, the young up and coming racer that Enzo has hired, a tire is blown when he hits something on the road, and it wipes out some bystanders who are just standing on the side of the road. It gave me nightmares just thinking about watching racing in general. The only time that I've ever been anywhere significant was I went to Monte Carlo and got to see one of the Formula One tracks. They were not actually racing at the time, but it was still a beautiful place to see in general. And so I'm assuming things have changed since then, this being in 1957. And as I mentioned already, the having this progression towards this race needing to be successful is even more significant given the fact that Laura is the money manager for Ferrari and is essentially handling all the finances. And the fact that Enzo is so independent and in control of everything else in his life, managing to have two families at this point, well, yeah, he does. I almost was going to disagree with myself. And the fact that he has to make this deal with Laura for 500 grand that he needs to use or will give her in order to control her controlling stake, her majority stake in the company, if to sell the company, to work with Ford or Fiat or whoever it may be, to continue to finance Ferrari and continue to be able to afford production. And I found that really interesting. As I mentioned in the non-spoilers, I was absolutely blown away by Penelope Cruz's performance. It was jaw-dropping. She goes from 0 to 10 in the blink of an eye, which is ironic. I guess somewhat that's a car pun. But, I guess no. Penelope Cruz goes from 0 to 60 very quickly. I don't know what time would be good for a car. Can you tell that I don't know very much about cars? But the unfortunate circumstance that Laura is in, where she clearly still loves Enzo, but as you would expect, having to bury a child has clearly put this wedge between the two of them, and there not being an heir to Ferrari, which is it's a very dated thing to think about, but it is certainly something that they were dealing with at the time, because eventually where would Ferrari go, or at least the majority ownership of the company, and the fact that he does have this son with Lena out of wedlock, and that she does not want that child to be given the Ferrari name, and her discovery of the child in general, and how that really ultimately causes the final fracture in the relationship. The relationship in general, up until that point, is very antagonistic and at times pleasant, but you can clearly tell that they're just together because it's for the state of Ferrari, the company, not Ferrari, their family. And I found that really interesting. Lena, played by Shailene Woodley, is a very modern woman, in this film, and even talks about her relationship with Enzo and that it came out of the war and how she would have viewed things very differently at the time and how she views them now. They have a son together, and so they're making that work, and the affection between them is clearly clear, and it's the most important thing to her is that her child is about to be confirmed, which is something that happens when you are Roman Catholic. Typically, it's around, well, it might have changed, but it's like between 12 to 14. It may be younger for Piero. I'm not necessarily sure how old he is at this time, but that she wants him to be confirmed with Ferrari. And so to have this back and forth where Enzo is trying to still keep the people he is happy with, these two women, and let them be happy with their choices, but ultimately can he do what he needs to do in order to save Ferrari and to save face with his family, and the gossip columns around that and how they use the media is particularly interesting, in how Enzo manipulates certain reports and even says that he'll give essentially an expose on his family if a reporter writes and something in the rumor mill about working with Ford. And I really like that dynamic. Anytime you get into the politics of media and how successful businessmen have manipulated it, I found to be quite interesting, even in something in 1957 when the film takes place. So overall, I think the film manages to be really entertaining. It's a captivating drama, but also has a lot of how would I phrase this? The car racing is really exciting and captivating. I've used that word a lot today. Can you tell? Somebody in the comments, let me know how many times I said the word captivating. The action of the car races is gripping, particularly using a lot of these dated cars, where I'm sure if you're a car historian, it would be really cool to see all of these old Ferraris from the 50s and even beforehand being used. One thing I can say, I guess I didn't mention in my limited ability with cars in general, is I can drive stick. Not well, but I can well enough to go to the grocery store. So I'm going to give myself a pat on the back for that. So if you are looking forward to Ferrari, I would highly recommend you check it out in the theaters. If you want to wait for it on streaming, I think that's okay as well, but it is not a film I would recommend you miss. If you did see it, let me know in the comments or on social media what you thought about the film. I don't have anything else to say about it. So next, I am going to be moving into my non-spoiler review of The Color Purple.
Today, our teacher taught us about a place called Africa. say our mamas come from Queens over there.
Now, The Color Purple is a adaptation of the Broadway adaptation of the 1985 film, which was an adaptation of the novel from 1982. How many times did I say adaptation? Now, typically, one might say, Kyle, they've made this too many times. There was the book, there was the movie, there was the musical. Why was there a musical of the book, of the movie? And this is certainly a trend where popular films that are based on popular books get the musical treatment. It's ironic that there is another one coming out this month that has not marketed itself at all as a musical. And in the marketing I saw for The Color Purple, it appeared that they were leaning more into the fact that this was a musical. I have seen the original, I've never read the book, and I am happy to say that I absolutely adored this film. Everybody in it was cast pitch perfectly. Fantasia Barrino, apologies for if I'm mispronouncing that, was an absolute pitch perfect casting, pun intended, because my goodness, is she phenomenal in this role. Something I was critical of for Wonka was that the overall music was not memorable. And at times when you are seeing a musical, that can be quite frustrating. But the music for this was super captivating, particularly one song sang by Danielle Brooks, Hell No, it was so much fun. I took my mom to see this, so shout out Debbie. Hi, Mom. But when adapting a Broadway musical to this from stage to film, it is the very fine line that you can ride, particularly in managing to take what is usually a 3-walled set on stage. Typically, you don't get 4. You can't go in. Well, you can go into the audience, but should you necessarily? That's not the point. But translating something that works on stage to the screen doesn't necessarily work. You need to use the full 3 dimensions that you have and allow for that depth and have a cinematic quality that is, we're going to use the word I used in the Ferrari review, captivating, and feel immersed in that and not feel as if the music comes out of nowhere or feels tone deaf to what's going on in the film. And from top to bottom, I thought the cast for this was absolutely phenomenal. As I mentioned, Fantasia Barrino was amazing. Taraji P. Henson, who I think became most popular for audiences for things like Hustle and Flow, and then I saw her in The Karate Kid, and then, of course, in My Empire. And she's been quite vocal about how SAG worked and the pay, particularly for working actresses, and how the money was dispersed when she was not as influential as she is now. And her playing Shug Avery, I think, was a really, really well executed stroke of casting. She fits in so perfectly, and the meta nature that character has in the film in general is really funny, particularly being a much more modern character, this taking place in the early 1900s leading up to the 1947 time period. And the film covers a large gambit of time, and I find it really interesting. And of course, I'm not somebody who necessarily should be talking about this stuff at all, but the way that it presents the experience of Celie in this time frame, not having any independence or agency, being quite literally sold off as a teenager to her Albert Mr. Johnson, played by the incredible Coleman Domingo. That is a really difficult role to play. That might have been a spoiler, so apologies. So I'll move off from any other plot points. But each individual character's relationship to Celie and her progression through absolute tragedy, and the character just persevering through so much difficulty and ultimately finding the brighter side and getting through all of this trauma and finding herself and who she is and who she wants to be, is a harrowing tale. And I was blown away by this film. I was looking forward to it being such an influential film, and having Oprah Winfrey and Steven Spielberg direct it. That's something to be to be held at high regard. The music being done by Chris Bowers, who worked on Mrs. America, Dear White People, and When They See Us, King Richard as well. So the influence on the film is quite significant. And then even having characters like John Baptiste, who obviously you would know if you watched The Late Show with Stephen Colbert, and then won every award, I think, for his work on his own solo album, and then the soundtrack for Soul. And so this film has everything for it, and I think it offers everything you're looking for in a Hollywood musical. All of the songs cover a wide variety of style, but while still managing that Broadway powerhouse essence that you would expect from something like this. And the way that they make you, the way that each of the songs make you feel, even the smaller moments, and having reprises to earlier songs and how that emotionally resonates as you are watching the film. I really enjoyed this. I'm looking forward to watching it again. I'm looking forward to showing other people this film. I think if you've never seen it, I would recommend you see this first and then maybe go back and watch the original. That might be heresy depending on your fandom of The Color Purple, but my vague memory of the original, I think, allowed for me to enter this experience as essentially a first-time viewing again. And every performance from start to end, I thought was really well done. You get a wide gambit of the human experience, and the different relationships that each of the characters have is really interesting given the wide range of time that this covers, particularly one where women's independence was non-existent at this time, and how each character reacts to how they are told to act or how they were told to behave, and how there is a certain percentage of the people that Celie comes into contact with that have no issue with that whatsoever. And then there are the unique some who are empowered and have agency and try to prop up Celie as she is in the darkest elements of her own life, and how she perseveres ultimately and at the end of that. I can't really say anything else outside of I really enjoyed this film. I would recommend anybody interested in seeing it to go and see it. I think it's worth seeing on the big screen. I think you would lose something from watching this on the small screen at home, particularly location shooting. This does take place in Georgia, and any opportunity to show a wide landscape and really help you be immersed into the environment all around. There are multiple different settings outside of Georgia, whether that be in the town, which I'm sure they built practically, or whether that's near the water, on the beach, or even elements of Africa that are used in the film. I really enjoyed this, and I'm looking forward to, as I said already, a second viewing. So that will do it for my non-spoiler section of the review. I'm going to get into spoilers, more specific plot details. So if you do not want to hear them, you can skip that and jump into the outro of the show and find out what's coming out next week.
How come you don't laugh none? Ain't you got something to make you just smile?
I mentioned it briefly, but Fantasia Barrino, or Barrino? I'm not exactly sure how to say it, so apologies if it... I'm guessing it's Barrino, but if it's Barrino, I'm not sure. Either way, Fantasia as Celie, the fact that this was her first acting gig ever is insane, because according to her Wikipedia, she's just pretty much been herself when it came to not acting. Her first on-camera performance, it's listed here that she was Celie as a replacement on Broadway, but not only, of course, is she the lead, so she has most of the screen time, but this is a performance that I would be completely shocked if she does not get nominated for an Oscar for. It is that time of the year typically when there's a lot of movies that are Oscar bait, and this time period you can see a lot of films trying to get that prestige acclaim. And while you could be cynical and assume that's the case given when this film was released and then the significance of the original film and it being of the Broadway musical, which I should have looked this up, but I'm not actually sure. I'm fairly certain that this version of the musical went on to win some Tonys, but I am not necessarily sure if that is the case. I should have looked up the actual musical. I don't know. Here we go. Film adaptation. Stage musical was in 2005. Did you win any Tonys? Let's find out. Tony Awards. It won Best Actress. Yeah. Okay. Interesting. And so, as the lead, all of the weight is on your shoulders. You are playing Celie, a character who was portrayed by not Oprah Winfrey, my goodness, Whoopi Goldberg in the original and won her an Academy Award. So the expectations were very, 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 very high. And in order to do something different, the benefit of this being a musical is it allows for a much more significant note. Did it win her? No, she got nominated. She didn't win for this. That doesn't actually matter to the point, but regardless, an Academy Award nominated performance is not something to be done lightly. And the fact that Fantasia not only manages to have her Celie feel her own, but the fact that she has to sing and dance on top of that just adds layers to the performance that it's something I'm not going to forget anytime soon. And one of the reasons that this film works is not only is Fantasia incredible, but everybody else around her. Daniel Brooks, who was in Peacemaker, a show, again, if you listen to my DC EU tier list, you know that I'm not a huge fan of. I didn't even remember she was in Orange is the New Black. That's not a show that's necessarily stuck with me, but she's playing the character of Sophia, who was played by Oprah Winfrey in the original, and sings Hell No, which I think is my favorite song of this musical version of the film. But each of the songs is toe-tapping, it's memorable, and having Corey Hawkins move on from In the Heights into this, he also, of course, played Dr. Dre in Straight Outta Compton, and so continues to add more versatile musical performances to his filmography, is really entertaining. Having Halle Bailey, who of course was Ariel in the more recent Little Mermaid, can absolutely sing. Everybody in this film is very well cast. Coleman Domingo as Mr. is a character that could so easily be somebody where you would wind up hating the actor because of the performance, which I think only goes to show how good he is in this. He's somebody who's rumored or has been fan cast as the possibility for taking over Kang the Conqueror because of things in the real world. And after seeing this, I could absolutely see him crushing Kang the Conqueror, because if you manage to be Albert Mr. Johnson, who I believe was played by, oh my goodness, my brain is mush. What is his name? I want to say it's Danny Glover, yes, from the original. And that character is so vile, but even in the worst circumstances, the film allows for even the worst character in Mr. to have some moment of redemption, which I quite appreciate, given how it'd be so easy in a film like this to paint the antagonist and villain of the story and just let that be. But even in the dark, after Celie has broken free from his marriage and has moved on, thanks to the help of Suge and Sophia, and even Harpo to some degree, and moves on to become her own independent person and taking over the suit shop that was in fact hers, and has a moment of clarity when she finds out that her own father was not actually her biological father. And it's when Mr. is left completely alone and sees what his actions have done, what the consequences to his life have been, treating everybody so poorly, and that he is completely left alone. And without looking for gratification, manages to allow Celie's sister, Nettie, to get back into the country, who had fled to Africa after having to flee from Mr. after an assault that nearly happens in the film. And that being the through line where there is a level of communication from Nettie and sending all these letters that Mister is not allowing her to see. But the fact that Nettie never gives up hope, and this connection that ultimately winds up being the conclusion of the film, which is just, it's so moving and heartwarming to build to this climax of the film being this town-wide Easter dinner, and Mister is wearing these almost seashell looking pants, which is a funny Easter egg, obviously with the Little Mermaid being in the film as well, and the reunion of Nettie and Celie and bringing this conclusion to the struggles that she had had early on in the film, having to give up the two children that she had sired. Now, I'm not necessarily sure if the guy who wasn't her dad were the fathers of these children, but I don't really want to dive into that because that would just make the film even darker. But I think the film works on all levels, whether that comes down to the performances, the cinematography, the direction, and the writing. All of those things is executed so well to a stellar regard that I'm going to recommend this film to anybody who's interested in a musical, anybody who's seen the original and is kind of hemming or hawing on whether to see a remake. I know that's a very touchy subject now, and I'm very interested if that's going to affect my reaction to an upcoming remake musical with Mean Girls, which is not marketing itself as a musical at all, which I find interesting given how the film is now 20 years old and it being such an iconic film for my generation. Why would you not market it to the generation that made it what it is, but maybe it's not made for mine? So I have heard some positive things, but wide reception to that hasn't necessarily been released yet. So I'm interested to seeing if I enjoy that film as much as I enjoyed this one. The Color Purple does everything an adaptation should do, where it takes the spectacle of the Broadway musical and brings it to the silver screen with jaw-dropping performances from start to end. And it is a film that I think stands the test of time amongst the original while managing to be its own thing on its own right. So I would really recommend this to anybody who's curious about it. The Color Purple is certainly worth a watch. That will do it for my spoiler section of the review. We're going to move into the outro where you can find out what I'm going to be discussing on the next episode of the podcast. Thank you for listening to the Film Realist podcast. My name is Kyle Naranya. I don't think I actually said it in the intro for the show. If you are listening on Spotify and would like to have your questions responded to on Spotify, please answer the question of the week. The most recent one was, what is your top 10 films of 2023? Scotty Cameron responded with, starting from the bottom, number 10, Transformers: Rise of the Beasts, number 9, The Killer, number 8, Blue Beetle, number 7, Screen 6, number 6, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, number 5, Saw 6, number 4, Spider-Man Across the Spider-Verse, number 3, John Wick Chapter 4, number 3. Number 2, Mission Impossible: Dead Reckoning Part 1, and number 1, Oppenheimer. So Scotty, we had a number of films in the same list. Scotty, you also responded to the previous week's question, which is your top 5 DCEU films, being Shazam at number 1, 2, The Suicide Squad, 3, Zack Snyder's Justice League, 4, Man of Steel, and 5, Wonder Woman. So some similar things there. If you would like your answers to the questions responded at the end of the episode, you can answer those questions on Spotify. If you are listening on any other podcast platform, please give a 5-star review, and your review will also be read on the podcast if I manage to actually remember to do that. I haven't checked for this episode, so if I do get any for next week, I will make sure to read them there. Please share the podcast with any of your film listening friends, anybody who's a cinephile who would like to hear one person talk about the stuff that he saw. Maybe this is that podcast for them. Next week on the show, I will be discussing Echo. All of Echo releases this week, if you are listening to the review the day it comes out. So that'll be really interesting. It's the first time Disney Plus or Marvel has done that. It's being labeled a Spotlight series, I believe. So all 8 episodes, I believe it's 8, will be releasing January 9th. So I'm looking to cover that. And then I will also be covering Monarch: Legacy of Monsters, which will come to its conclusion the week that this is uploaded. So 2 TV shows, and I think that's it, because I think Mean Girls remake comes out the following week. Let's see if I'm correct on that. No, that comes out the 12th. So there may be a lot of things on next week's episode of the podcast. So make sure you are following the podcast on social media if there are any changes to the review schedule. I'm just going to talk off the top of my head. I think if anything, Monarch Legacy of Monsters will get bumped to the following week because January is a very busy week, and I think I will probably get more traction talking about Marvel and Mean Girls. Not that I don't want to talk about Monarch Legacy of Monsters. I certainly do, but I don't think there's anything coming out of note on the 19th, so that might be the best time to talk about that then. So make sure you are following me personally or any of the podcast threads. I am on Threads, Twitter/X, Blue Sky, Hive, Vero, Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, TikTok. I'm on all the things, so make sure you are following them. Thank you for listening to the Film Realist podcast, and I hope to see you next week.